Hello, my friends, and welcome to FISHTORY. I'm Alexander Williamson, your host as always, and today we're talking about community fish and feeding them kind of prepared food. So the kind of food that you would get in a little can or a little jar, and fish that come in your community aquarium that aren't super specialized eaters. Now, how do you know if your fish is a specialized eater? Well, you have to do your research. But most fish in this hobby are not what I would call specialized eaters. You basically have your algae eaters and cleanup crew and detrivores, which eat kind of leftover plant material, dead other fish material or protein, and algae and protein films and different things in our aquarium that build up over time, just as they do in nature. Then you've got the fish that make up things like tetras and, rasboras and pencilfish and live bears, guppies, mollies, platies, goldfish, all the fish that, kind of hang out mid-water that are 1 to 3 or 4 inches. Those fish tend to be insect eaters, or they tend to eat the baby fish of other fish or eggs of other fish or whatever they can just scrounge up that day. But it turns out they happen to eat a lot of plants and bacteria and fungi and other stuff also. And the reason we know that is we cut them open in the wild. And when we describe a species, oftentimes we talk about what was found in the stomachs of living fish when they were dissected during a necropsy. And when we do this, it's really good information to have, and a lot of times it's published in their taxonomic debut papers that describe the fish. Other times you have to wait a little longer and find research. But hopefully when you buy a fish, you kind of look into the info and make sure you don't have one of those really specialized fish. There's things like panda loaches or things like pufferfish or eels that may only eat 1 or 2 things, and they digest a very specific diet. Or you need to get them things like frozen food or shrimp, or for that matter, there's fish like Elosoma, Gulf pygmy sunfish, that need live food. They just don't seem to eat flake food very well. So today we're not talking about that. We're talking about your common fish that your intro level aquarist is gonna usually have, and your cleanup crew, we're gonna talk about them too, because your snails, your shrimp, we need to feed them too. So let's go over what are 3 or 4 products that you could have on hand that would basically cover all your nutritional bases for most fish. That's what we're talking about today. So let's go take a look inside and feed my fish. Your tank is actually a buffet. Now, if you have a planted tank, you've got all sorts of different foods all around 24/7 for these fish to eat. However, most little fish are going to be insectivores, and they're just going to eat something like 70 to 90% of their protein in the form of water insects and or terrestrial insects. The rest are usually going to be either algivores, or they're going to eat protein from other fish and or invertebrates that are in the ecosystem. So if you have small or medium-sized fish, that means you need to give them, 1, a balanced diet of protein and fats in order to grow. And I like to use stuff like fry food, because it's usually really high in protein. Something like 50 to 60% is great, and fat anywhere from 5 to 10 or 15% is great. Other than that, it's just down to the ease of feeding. I like to sprinkle a pinch or 2 of this in, say, a 20-gallon tank. And because in the wild they're getting most of their protein from insects, I like to feed fluval bug bites, which are insect larvae in the form of black soldier fly larva that's been dried out and pressed into a larva meal, or sort of a flour made out of larva, just like they make flour out of crickets and stuff. Now, if you have bigger fish, you can feed them things like extreme, like for your cichlids or rainbow fish, or even like mid-size, like Congo tetras, stuff like that, goldfish. It's just a bigger size, but again, you're going with that 50 to 60% protein kind of goal if you can. This one's got 40% protein basically, and fat's 5%. So this one has a little more filler, whereas a lot of the fry foods and nano foods are even more protein packed. That's just a little trick if you want to get more protein bang for your buck. That works out pretty well. You can also feed them a bit of the fluval bug bites or other bug-related products. I know Sarah makes an insect-based product as well. And here you'll see the protein again. 46%, the fat 7.5%, and this is going to be their mixed version. And Sarah is kind of a middle to higher end food mix out of Europe. And so they do a pretty good mix in their flakes. But really, if you're going to be feeding a whole tank and you've got these cleanup crew guys and stuff, you're going to want to supplement with something like these Hikari algae wafers or like this Zoomed spirulina mix, something like that. Now, they are going to get algae off your glass and off your plants and other stuff, but check it out. Even my panda loaches, which are notoriously picky, they like eating both the fluval bug bites and they like eating the little flakes and algae wafers. So they are definitely happy to get their fill that way. And same with the loaches and the rest of the cleaning crew that's also hanging out here. Autosynclus, plecos, cories, and other critters like that, gobies and so forth as well. Now, beyond all of this, making sure you have enough KH and GH will also help their minerality in the aquarium, which will just keep your fish fat and sassy, nice and colorful. Beyond that, you can do things like add color enhancing products with astaxanthin in them. I have whole episodes on that and color enhancing products and what, that's all about, how it enhances the colors of the fish, especially reds, oranges, and yellows. But you can check that out in another video. And granted, you can feed live food, that's the best. You can build a food web in your aquarium, that can be very good. Or you can, feed frozen food and do kind of a hybrid approach. That's also great. But realistically, I know not everyone has time for all of that. And so I know that a lot of y'all are going to be feeding pre-prepared foods or want something that can be, fed from a auto feeder or something like that, especially if you're trying to put weight on a group of fish that are growing out as a group and that you're trying to later sell or so forth. Now, it's important to do your research on what kind of snails you have and what it is that they eat. A lot of people assume that plecos, snails, autosynclus, loaches, and even cichlids and things, they assume they eat one thing, and it's not always true. So try to look for good scientific reports or good quality content species spotlights or deep dives on channels where they get into the research that says what was in the stomachs of the average fish found in the Amazon or found in the wild. And that will give us a pretty good clue as to what these fish need to have a balanced diet in the aquarium. Surprisingly, things like live bears eat a ton of things like duckweed and algae and biofilms and little microorganisms that aren't even identifiable in the gut as anything but, protein. So they're constantly searching around and looking for, substitute foods, looking for little things to munch on. And depending on how densely planted your tank is, how mature it is, and what you're feeding in other terms, all of that is subject to being different to every aquarist. I want to show you something that my cat's highlighting right now. She shouldn't be up here. She's a bad girl. But check this out. So up here we have aphids. And we have aphids and we have springtails. And the springtails eat the honeydew and the sheds of the aphids, but they're living all over the surface of just your average aquarium setup. And a lot of times fungi will even grow from the secretions of the aphids, like that white stuff there, and it will be harvested then by these other little white bugs that are called springtails that jump around. Well, all of these are just excellent food for the baby fry and the baby fish that are in the aquarium. If you just stir up anything floating or any immersed plants in your tank, a lot of times you'll see that there's little white things jumping and that there's protein films and things on the top of your water. That's all extra food and snacks for fish, or for the microorganisms and just above micro-sized organisms that your fish munch on all day when they're bored, when you don't feed them. So depending on how much of an ecosystem you've built and how much diversity and biomass exists in proportion to how much weight of fish you have in your aquarium, if there is a sufficient mass to provide a meal a day, and then those creatures can, breed and replenish their numbers, it is theoretically possible to keep an aquarium being self-sufficient. But it's pretty hard to do, and it requires having, something like this 50 or 60 gallon tank and only keeping something like a dozen guppies in the whole thing that's very, very planted. Same with snails. They'll get out of control very quickly if you overfeed. So it's generally suggested that you feed a pinch of whatever your primary protein food is and let that kind of spread on the surface. And if you notice that there are certain fish that are not getting their fair share, or there's shrimp that are kind of down at the bottom hiding out and they're kind of scared of the fish and things like that, then it's a good idea to add a little bit on one side, a little bit on another. Maybe even take tweezers or a turkey baster and actually squirt the food in mixed in with water, or make a little mix of the food and put it in different parts of the tank, as well as breaking up things like those algae pellets so that they can be accessed by different organisms, different creatures at different times. A lot of this is contingent onto allowing things like algae and the microorganisms to form in your aquarium. And a lot of people think that that's somewhat unsightly, but when you get rid of all of it, oftentimes you're getting rid of a lot of snacks that they eat during the day. And when you do this, these fish are used to eating little tiny bits of something, 30, 40, 50 times a day sometimes. And so if you can't feed them just a tiny, tiny, minute pinch, and I'm talking for all these fish, like this much of the dried insects, every 2 hours, you could do that and you could get them to grow very well. However, you overfeed them very easily if you're not, rationing and knowing how much to feed for how much of each fish species is present. So I recommend feeding a diversity of things a few times a day, and basically you want to feed whatever they'll consume in about 3 minutes of each fish being on the food. So if a fish doesn't get to the food until 5 minutes after everyone else is done, like these loaches at the bottom that are slow, you still want them to eat for 3 or 4 minutes on those algae wafers and things. And for snails and slow critters, you can double that time easily. But the point is, you don't want your fish gorging and having a couple species or a couple individuals eating way more than all the others. Also, look out in these, kind of all-in-one flake foods and pellet foods. Look and make sure that the first few ingredients aren't going to be wheat or soy. Here we see that gamaris is the first ingredient, which is scuds, which is great, and then spirulina, then followed by algae and more little organisms. So that's absolutely great. Cod liver oil, herbs and alfalfa, stinging nettle, green lip mussel, paprika, spinach, garlic, all that stuff is great and full of vitamins. So this is something you'll pay a little bit more for, and there's lots of great brands out there. I can't talk about all of them now, but do your homework and just make sure that wheat, corn, or soy are not in the top 5 ingredients, and you'll do just fine. Hey friends, let me stop you really quick and say thank you so much for hitting that like button. If I have earned it, if you're entertained, if you're interested, thank you for hitting that button, for sharing this content with people that you think it would be helpful for, and for everything you do here, leaving comments, telling me what I can do better, telling me fascinating information and facts. You guys are the best community out there in all of FishTube. Cat, I'm trying to sleep, and you drop this butterfly off every time I try to sleep. Take a look. It's in a book. Reading Rainbow. 3 in the morning, crazy cat. Meow, 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 meow. Reading kitty. Oh, probably threw it underneath the couch. Good. Maybe it'll take her a while to find it. Maybe I can go to bed. Oh, no, never mind. She's coming from the other side.